If you took the Fortune 500 CEOs and put them in a competition with Mrs. B, she would win. This is what billionaire investor Warren Buffett told Charlie Rose in a 2006 interview when speaking about Rose Blumkin, aka Mrs. B. This woman was so good at business that she took a $500 loan and turned it into a multi-million-dollar empire. She was an immigrant, she had no formal education, and she was a woman in a world dominated by men. Yet, she thrived. She was so successful that the legendary investor Warren Buffett said the only person he doesn't want to ever compete with was Mrs. B. He was so serious that in a contract he signed with her at the age of 99, he made sure she signed she will not compete with him for as long as she lived. Warren Buffett went on to say of her, "Put her up against the top graduates of the top business schools or chief executives of the Fortune 500, and assuming an even start with the same resources, she will run rings around them." Mrs. B was a business legend, yet very few people know about her. This woman who has so much to teach the world has been ignored by the world. In this video, we'll follow the story of Mrs. B. Before we continue, please kindly support this channel by liking this video and subscribing. It will mean a lot to us. Your support keeps us going. Thank you. The legend of Mrs. B begins in Russia. Mrs. B was born in the tiny village of Skridin, Russia in 1893. She was the only sister in a family of 8 children. Her family of 10 lived in a 2-room log house. Her father, a rabbi, was so poor that Rose and her brothers had to sleep on the straw mattresses. On some nights, her mother would boil water for the kids as dinner as they could not afford any meal. Poverty haunted Rose at every opportunity. At the age of 13, Rose walked barefoot for 18 miles to the nearest station just so she can save the leather soles of her brand new shoes. On getting on the train, she didn't feel like a normal passenger. She hid under the seat to avoid paying her travel fare. She had just 4 cents and she meant to save it for as long as she could. This journey was not just a tourist adventure. It was a journey of a girl in search of a job. She was rejected 25 times. Of course, who will accept a 13-year-old who looked ragtag? But you see, Mrs. B was not like the rest of us who will have quit. She kept on knocking on different doors. On the 26th door, a dry goods store owner decided to listen to her. Mrs. B told him, "I'm not a beggar. I've got 4 cents in my pocket. Let me sleep in your house and I'll show you how good I am tomorrow." The next morning, she was up before everyone and waited on the customers. When they came, she picked the goods so fast, calculated the prices so fast without any pencil, and she was so good with the customers that by 12 o'clock, the store owner asked if she was going to stay. She was hired. By age 16, she was a manager, supervising 6 married men. "Don't worry about the men, Mama," she wrote her mother. "They all mind me." At the age of 20, she married Isadora Blumkin, a shoe salesman. That same year, World War I broke out, and anti-Semitic vigilantes began melting out violence on Jews. They made their minds to leave Russia in that same time. To where? America. "I dreamed all my life since I was 6 years old," she said. "The first dream of mine was to go to America." In Russia, they used to have pogroms against the Jews. They would cut up the pregnant women and take out the kids. They would tear up their fathers and they would have a dance in the main market. I was 6 years old when I found out about that. I said I'm going to America when I grow up. There was one problem though. Mrs. B and her husband had the money for only 1 passenger. You know what she did? She sent her husband ahead and started saving money for her own travel. 2 years later, the Tsarist monk Rasputin was killed by revolutionaries in December 1916. Fearing the chaos that would ensure even more than the cruelties of the Tsarist regime, Rose began her journey to America. But this will be no ordinary trip. Rose didn't have the complete money for a usual trip. She had to travel from Russia to China, then to Japan before finally boarding a peanut boat for America. In describing her experience many years later, she said, "I thought I would never get here." She was soon reunited with her husband in Fort Dodge, Iowa. Rose became pregnant soon after arriving and gave birth to a daughter, Frances. She didn't speak a word of English. 2 years later, she still knew very little English. Feeling isolated, the Blumkins decided they would needed to live somewhere Rose could converse in Russian and Yiddish. So they moved to Omaha, a city with 32,000 immigrants. It was here that her legend would be made. It was her daughter that eventually taught her to speak English. Rose did not abandon her family after moving to the US. She saved up some money and brought all her 10 relatives to America, one after the other. Within a few years, Rose had 3 more children. Her husband had established a pawn shop at this point. However, the depression was affecting businesses. The store struggled and family almost went broke. Then Rose took charge. She knew what she had to do. Undersell the big short, she told her husband, "You buy an item for $3 and sell it for $3.3, 10% over cost." When the old-fashioned suits they carried weren't selling, Rose handed out 10,000 circulars all over Omaha, saying their stores will outfit a man for $5 from head to toe. Underwear, suit, tie, shoes, and straw hat. They took in $800 in a single day, more than they had made the entire year before. An era of empire building had begun for the Blumkin family. The store branched out into jewelry and furniture. Then Rose drove the department stores crazy when she started underselling them on new fur coats on consignment. But she had a philosophy: it's better to have them hate you than to feel sorry for you. Soon, customers started asking her for more furniture. She found out that furniture selling was a happy business, and as a result, the Nebraska Furniture Mart was born. She used to sell the furniture with a 13% profit margin. Here is how it worked. She bought for $10, she would sell for $10.1, thus making a profit by bulk selling. The prices were so cheap that either her competitors perished or she acquired their businesses. Her motto is, "Sell cheap and tell the truth. Don't cheat nobody and don't take no kickbacks." It was the same model that Walmart used. It is the same business that Amazon uses. That is, making a profit by selling huge volumes of products. In 1937, she borrowed $500 from a brother to expand her furniture business. The furniture wholesalers didn't want to sell it to her because retailers had complained that she was underselling them. Their rejection wouldn't stop Mrs. B. She went to Chicago, found one sympathetic man, and ordered $2,000 worth of merchandise from him on 30 days credit. The time came due and she was short, so she sold her own house furnishing cheap to pay off the debt. "When my kids came home, they cried like somebody will die," she recalled. Eventually, she restocked household stationeries and the kids stopped crying. But this business was hard for Mrs. B. Since no one close by was selling to her, she had to travel around the country trying to buy furniture wholesale. She said of this time, "The more the wholesaler boycotted me, the harder I worked. And I tell you, no one worked harder than Mrs. B." The wholesalers knew that. Very soon they started cutting her. At this point, she already hated them. "When you're down, they spit on you," she said. "When you start making some dollars, they start paying attention. Who needs them? Give me the middle class and I'll be happy." Mrs. B added carpets to her business by giving her customers a better price than any other carpet dealer. But carpet makers, Mohawk, filed the lawsuit to enforce their minimum pricing policies and sent their 3 best lawyers to court. It was kind of a law made by manufacturers to make their retailers to charge minimum price. It was about to go down. Guess what Mrs. B did? Mrs. B showed up at court alone. "I said to the judge, I don't have any money for a lawyer because nobody will sell to me. Judge, I sell everything 10% above cost. What's wrong? I don't rob my customers." The trial lasted only an hour before the judge threw the case out. The next day, he went out to the furniture mart and bought $1,400 worth of carpet. Can you beat that? Furniture Mart was progressing, but there was one problem. Mrs. B was doing business on the edge. She was still collecting supplies on credit and paying only after sales. She didn't like this. She wanted to pay upfront so she can buy more. This is where an Omaha banker came in. Wade Martin borrowed Mrs. B $50,000 to be repaid within 90 days. This was great news, but now she had a new problem. She had to sell all the merchandise within the stipulated 90 days. For this woman who had been solving problems all her life, this was just another challenge. She hit upon the idea of renting the Omaha City Auditorium and cramming it with sofas and dinners and coffee tables and TV sets. She put out an art that should go down in history as one of the highest converting arts of all time. It goes, this is it. Sales of sales, shortages, Malaki. We can't eat them, we must sell them. We've been shipped so much merchandise these past 60 days, we have no warehouse room. Yes, we're overloaded and how? We can't eat them and usually couldn't sell them as much in 6 months. So we've staged the largest sale ever of its type ever held in this area. 45,000 square feet filled with the most unheard of savings of famous brand merchandise. The turnout was massive. It was as if there was a festival in town. The Furniture Mart sold $250,000 worth of furniture in 3 days. Remember that this was the time of the Great Depression, which made it all the more impressive. By the end of the fair, everyone in Omaha knew about Rose Blumkin and Furniture Mart. People came into the store at every stage of their lives. When they got married, when they bought their first house, when they had a baby, when they got a big promotion, Furniture Mart was now a part of people's lives. By the early 1980s, Mrs. B had transformed Nebraska Furniture Mart into the largest furniture store in North America. The store, spanning 3 acres, generated over $100 million in annual sales, 10 times the volume of similarly sized stores. From that point on, sales grew consistently every year, regardless of economic conditions or Omaha's growth. The established home furniture retailers in Omaha who had once competed with her had all disappeared. New retailers tried to enter the market and compete with the Mart, but they were no match for Rose, a formidable competitor whom even Warren Buffett respected. She outperformed them all, capturing half of the metropolitan area business, more than Sears, Montgomery Ward, Target, and all other furniture and appliance retailers combined. But she wasn't done yet. Her marketing did not stop. Soon, customers began arriving from other states. Mrs. B had a soft spot for immigrants. She hired them in large numbers, offering them the opportunity to start life as they arrived in America. Of course, she could relate with their struggles as she was once an immigrant herself. Business was booming. Furniture Mart, which began with just $500, had become a multi-million-dollar empire. Enters Warren Buffett, the billionaire sage of Omaha. Buffett had tried to buy the business previously, but Mrs. B wasn't interested in selling at that point. She had told Buffett that he would try to steal her business, but Buffett's opinion about Mrs. B was quite interesting. He once said, "If I want to start a business and have to choose between the top 25 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and Mrs. B to run it, I'm going with Mrs. B." A year later, Buffett got an opportunity of buying the whole business with Mrs. B's conditions. The only question Buffett asked was, "Do you have debt?" Which Nebraska Furniture Mart didn't have. Based on a handshake, he bought 90% of her company at a valuation of $61 million. Buffett never took an audit. He never checked the inventory. He never verified the receivables. He never checked the titles of the real estate. Warren Buffett never checked any of it because when a little old Russian lady called Mrs. B gave you her word, it meant you got something like a document from the Bank of England. When Buffett auditors checked the books after the deal, they found out the store was worth $85 million. She had sold it for $25 million less. Mrs. B went on to live till the age of 104 and working till 103. She sold her business at the age of 91. One time Mrs. B was asked for advice for the next generation. She said, "First, honesty. Second, hard work. Next, if you don't get a job you want right away, tell them you take anything. If you are good, they'll keep you." Rose Blumkin stands up there with the greatest business leaders of the 20th century. Her story and her business journey are an inspiration. In an era when females were encouraged to stay home, cook, clean, and be domesticated warriors, Mrs. B did it all. Warren Buffett once said, "Students from Fortune University visit me every year. If they absorb Mrs. B's lesson, they need none from me." Thank you for watching this episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Until I see you again, bye bye.